Los Angeles Clippers have acquired Norman Powell and Robert Covington for Eric Bledsoe, Justise Winslow, and Keon Johnson. In addition, they will get a future second round pick that I believe is a 2025 second round pick for their troubles. Now, it's an interesting deal for a number of reasons. And I kind of just wanted to talk a little bit about it. We're going to post this video up on YouTube. It's going to go up a few hours before the podcast goes live. So go to Game Theory Podcast with Sam Vecenie on YouTube, hit that subscribe button, and you'll be able to get this before anyone else does on the podcast. But let's just kind of jump into why I think this is a really good deal for the Clippers. And I want to say maybe a little bit questionable for the Blazers. It's not a terrible deal for the Blazers. I understand what they were going for philosophically. I just don't know that I'm completely there with it in terms of the evaluation. So let's start with the Clippers. The Clippers get Norman Powell and Robert Covington. Norman Powell, even though the Blazers have not been very good this year, Norman Powell, you can't lay any of that at his feet. He's averaging like 19 points, 3 rebounds, 2 assists. He's shooting 45% from the field, 41% from 3, 80% from the line. He's efficient. He's a shot creator. Everything that the Blazers could have asked of him whenever they acquired him for Gary Trent, Norman Powell has done. He's a starting quality player in the NBA. He's a really, really good rotation player that I think fits on a lot of contenders because he's 6'3" with 7-foot wingspan. He can defend multiple positions. He's strong. As long as they're not overly large players, he's tough and physical. I think that he fits exactly what the Clippers look for with guys that will be fitting around Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. I also like the idea of his roster fit. Just kind of given the guys surrounding him currently. This team really needed more backcourt help. I've been surprised that they've even gotten what they've gotten out of Eric Bledsoe so far this season. But Norman Powell is like an undeniable upgrade on Bledsoe. He does have about 4 years and over $70 million left on this contract. So it's a deal that the Clippers under Steve Ballmer certainly can afford to take on. And certainly, given his wealth, should be in the market to take on because not everyone, I would imagine, in the NBA was all that interested in Norman Powell, despite the fact that he is a really good player because of that contract situation. But Powell fits with basically everyone on this Clippers roster. He fits really well in the backcourt with Reggie Jackson as kind of a two-headed shot creation monster. He fits really well next to Terrence Mann, due to Terrence Mann being able to make up for some of the deficiencies that Norman Powell might have. I think he's going to fit really well, maybe even as a sixth man, microwave scorer off the bench whenever Kawhi Leonard and Paul George get back. And this is a Clippers team that somehow, some way, with Ty Lue holding it together, like with gum and a paper clip and shoestring, they're competing for a playoff berth, for a play-in berth. Like they're right there in the mix in the West. So the fact that this team has a 500 record without essentially Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, it's remarkable. Norman Powell is another guy that is just a professional basketball player that fits the mold for them. He also kind of fits in terms of what the Clippers have not valued in the past. The Clippers aren't a team that really values a ton of like shot creation for others, right? You look at the players that they've gone out and acquired really outside of Terrence Mann, not necessarily awesome passers like Reggie Jackson for a point guard, not an incredible playmaker passer. He can make some high level reads, but he's more looking for his own bucket. Paul George, Kawhi Leonard, guys that like aren't incredible passers. They're fine passers, but not super high level. Norm Powell kind of fits this mold. Luke Kennard, another guy, more of a scorer than a passer. You can kind of look up and down the roster. Marcus Morris is another guy. Like they really value guys who can create their own shot because they think that they put pressure on the defense at a high level. And Norman Powell is a guy that pressures the defense because of his ability to get his own shot almost whenever he wants. So I really like this acquisition for the Clippers. Like I think they did really, really well here to get Norman Powell because he fits a number of, different ways that they're competing now and into the future. They also get Robert Covington here. I've been a little bit less of a fan of Covington this year. He has been previously traded for 2 first-round picks famously over the course of this contract that was seen as an incredible value when he was signed to it by the Philadelphia 76ers, and then was moved to the Minnesota Timberwolves, was moved down to Houston, then up to Portland. He just hasn't been that good this year. He's been a bit of an inconsistent shooter. He's right around his career mark of 35%. That's always been his thing, is he goes through streaks, right, where he's a really good shooter, and then he goes through streaks where he struggles to shoot the ball at a high level. I don't know that you can necessarily rely on him offensively all the time. Defensively, he is always going to be in the right spot. He's a good rotational defender. I do think that as he's aged a little bit, the on-ball questions, because he's always been very long-limbed and kind of get leveraged on the ball a little bit in switch scenarios. I think that those questions have continued to rise, but essentially as a throw-in here, for the Clippers, if you think of this deal as Norman Powell for Keon Johnson, and then this second round pick for Robert Covington, essentially with Bledsoe and Winslow just being the salary match to make it possible to make these deals happen. I think he is worth a second round pick. I think he's probably worth a couple of second round picks, to be honest. And this is kind of where the Blazers come in. I wonder if they would have been a little bit better off kind of maybe splitting these guys up in a deal. But I'm sure that from their perspective, what they were thinking philosophically was, if we combine these two assets into a single deal, we can maybe get an even better prospect that we evaluate at a much higher level than what we would get by splitting them up. Maybe we'd get a couple of seconds for Robert Covington. Maybe we'd get a late first or a couple seconds for Norman Powell. Instead, let's combine them together. Let's get someone we really like. Is Keon Johnson that guy? I think is the question. Very polarizing prospect in the 2021 NBA draft. Some teams really loved the upside, really loved the athleticism that he brings to the table. The kid is considered to be an exceptionally high-level human being. Really, really great kid. Works hard. There were some injury questions coming in. He had an injured knee in his senior year of high school, and some teams had a few concerns about that. Additionally, his freshman year at Tennessee, he was expected to come in, be this incredible one-and-done prospect. I had him as a top 7 prospect at the very least coming into the season on my board. And he struggled at Tennessee quite a bit. Some people laid that at the feet of Rick Barnes. But I think that it was more on Keon's lack of polish offensively, I think is the better way to put it. His handle is still pretty raw. His shooting is still inconsistent at this point. A lot of what he does is just slashing based off of pure athleticism. And at Tennessee, where the offense wasn't necessarily incredibly well spaced, we saw some of the flaws come up in his game. In the G League this year, we've seen a little bit more of that slashing ability because the court is a little bit more opened up for him and he's capable, but we've also seen many of the same concerns come up, even at that level. His passing ability has shown some high-level flashes. He's averaging almost 4 assists per game, but he's also turning the ball over almost 4 times per game because they're kind of really letting him have the ball and rock a little bit with the Agua Caliente Clippers G League affiliate. So a lot of the same flaws are kind of here, and that feels a bit concerning, even though he is very, very young for his class. I believe he is still 19 years old. It's a tricky spot. So in the case of the Blazers, I'm not surprised that this front office, which is still much of the same front office they had under Neil Olshey before he was let go. Joe Cronin right now is the interim GM. I'm not surprised that this front office valued Keon at a pretty high level, it seems like. The reason for that is if you look through their past draft history over the last little while, they've tended to value these guys that have high-level athletic traits that may still be coming along in terms of feel for the game. They also tend to value drafting guys really, really young. You look at a guy like Anthony Simons, who's certainly coming into his own, right? You look at a guy like Greg Brown this year that was selected in the second round, guy with all the athletic tools in the world, still trying to figure out his feel for the game a little bit. The Blazers do tend to value these guys, and they tend to draft a little bit younger, thinking that rookies aren't necessarily going to come in and set the world on fire. So you might as well get the guy with the highest level of talent and then try to develop them. I've kind of not necessarily always agreed with that strategy, but it's certainly working out in the case of Anthony Simons, who in many ways, his emergence has allowed Portland the ability to move someone like Norman Powell. They really need to open up minutes for Anthony Simons whenever Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum get back, right? So I understand what they're going for here on a number of fronts. This is pure speculation. I have not talked to the Blazers about Keon Johnson, but I would speculate just based off of their draft history. They probably had a really high grade on Keon Johnson last year. And making this move, combining those two assets together in Covington and Powell to acquire essentially Keon Johnson as their lottery ticket, that says to me that they probably had a very high grade on Keon Johnson last year. The thing is, though, that if you're the Clippers, the G League scouts, the people I've talked to who have watched, every game of the Agua Caliente, as opposed to me, who's, kind of checking in and out and not watching every single minute that Keon Johnson has played this season at that level. The people I've talked to that I trust have kind of said that BJ Boston has passed Keon Johnson by as their, best prospect on that team. And that shows, I think, in a big way, just in terms of BJ Boston's the guy that's gotten the opportunities whenever injuries have come up with the Clippers, whenever COVID kind of wreaked havoc on, the team's roster and they had to fill in guys, right? Like every team in the NBA has. BJ Boston's been the guy that's gotten the chances. Keon Johnson's played 15 games so far. BJ Boston's played 37. He's been a part of their rotation at times throughout the course of this season. The people I've talked to have said that, they thought BJ was probably the better prospect in terms of their hierarchy of prospects. So the Clippers, they didn't have to give up the best prospect they had in the 2021 NBA draft, even though they drafted Keon Johnson higher than BJ. BJ was a guy that always had the high level talent. He just didn't have a good season at Kentucky last year for whatever reason. I think that, we might look back on the 2021 draft and think that COVID just completely wreaked havoc on the evaluation and wreaked havoc on kids' lives and didn't give them a chance to show all that they were capable of. In the case of BJ Boston, the Clippers look like they found something in a really young player on the wing who can provide value. The Clippers acquire two guys that will be a part of their rotation moving forward, who will help them now. Norman Powell will certainly help them into the future. Robert Covington is on an expiring contract. We'll see if the team decides to bring him back in the offseason. But, if Kawhi Leonard and Paul George make a crazy comeback at the end of the year here, Paul George, I think we would expect to come back at some point. Ty Lue said that they're going to reevaluate him in a couple of weeks following this elbow injury. And then Kawhi Leonard, I think that Ty Lue said last night they're not expecting him back at any point soon. But, certainly I think that the more you can do to position the Clippers to be in a good situation to make a run, if Kawhi Leonard does come back, you're probably setting yourself up for success. So I really like this deal for the Clippers a lot. I think they did really well. They didn't give up their best prospect in the 2021 draft in order to acquire two guys that I think will help them this year. For the Blazers, I understand the philosophy. I think I'm a little bit lower on Keon Johnson than what some people are. But I understand why this particular organization, given their history of evaluating prospects in the recent history, might be a little bit higher on Keon and decided to prioritize him in a trade over maybe some other prospects that they could have acquired in other deals. I don't hate it for the Blazers. I just think it's a very high variance kind of trade that you're essentially pinning all of your hopes onto this one asset now, who is a polarizing asset to begin with. We'll see if it works out for them. But let's get to Cole Huff, and maybe I'll ask him a little bit about this deal, and I'll ask him about some other kind of deals that could happen this week. Now that we're within 1 week of the NBA trade deadline, this is the deal that finally maybe opened the floodgates a little bit, and then we'll see where it goes from there.